But the class is called The Soul and Money, and we're going to talk more about matters of the soul than money. So I promise it's going to be a slightly fun, enlightening experience. And what I want to do first is just take a moment of silence and of prayer and reflection to give us to shift gears, because we're all coming from a busy day, possibly a commute, possibly a traffic battle. And I just want us to give ourselves the gift of presence, of being in this room here tonight. So if you would, go ahead and close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. But we're going to try to tune out the day a bit. We're going to play this song, and this area of money can be one that's dark, and it can be one there's possibly shame around it. So what we're going to do is just take a moment to breathe and release that if that's the case for us.
There's no darkness in your eyes. There's no question in your mind, God Almighty, God of mercy. There's no hiding from your face. There's no striving in your grace, God of mercy, God Almighty. Let there be light. Open the eyes of the blind. Purify our hearts in your fire. Breathe in us, we pray. Jesus, have your way.
His light fills every space in our lives. And so that's why we are here tonight, right? For this topic that can represent joy in our life, and it can represent pain in our life. It can represent sorrow. So we have the ability to accomplish amazing change as humans, but there is no ability greater than the power of the Holy Spirit at work inside of us to give us supernatural ability to transcend behaviors that we have done in the past that have been hard-coded into our wiring. So taking a moment and inviting God into that space is totally necessary. So as you've already gathered, this is not a budgeting class. And while there are tactical aspects to this, what it really is an invitation to an introspective journey where we take some time to get clarity around our motivations around money and striving, and our behaviors can then become conscious. So Carl Jung said, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life and we will call it fate. So some of us have pain in our money journeys because of unconscious behavior, what is deep beneath the tip of the iceberg that we just go through life on autopilot, not examining. So that's what this 4 weeks is for. It'll be 4 weeks, and we'll just allow ourselves just some space to get really introspective, ask some deep questions that are deep within, and allow our soul's attachments to emerge to the top. And we can then at least examine them and decide if we want to venture on to behavior change. So I'm really fortunate to be leading us in this journey, and I want to share why. So a little bit about my story. My family and I were born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, and my sweet husband Keith, he's just a miracle of a human being. You may have met him as you walked in. So this is our extended family. These are our 3 little girls and my parents. And our 3 little girls, we call this one Fighting in Cabo, because usually they fight in Irvine, and sometimes they fight on paddle boards, and they fight on surfboards, and they fight different locations. This one's Fighting in Cabo, where they took a brief pause from the fighting to pause for this family picture. And my parents are really wonderful people too. they were foster parents over my entire upbringing. They fostered 52 foster brothers and sisters from the time I was 12 on, and that really informed my upbringing. It informed, of course, the way me and my biological brothers see the world. And so money for us, it's just been a really deep exploration, because through being raised in a foster home with 52 brothers and sisters, most of them ended up in our home as a result of economic reasons, usually poverty-driven decisions that their parents felt they had to make would cause them to lose their children, and their children would end up in the foster system. So that gave me a deep familiarity with money's power, or lack of money's power to harm, but then also money's power to heal when it's put into hands that live out their highest values with money. And so what I want to do today is give us some space to talk about your first memory with money. So there is, at the top of your handout, does everybody have a handout, I think? At the top of your handout, there's some space there to just take a moment and reflect on your earliest memory of money. And what I would love you to do is just think about that, and then we'll share your names if you haven't already done that. And then, so in our lives, we've all experienced pain around the relationship with money and the striving it represents. We spend a lot of energy suppressing it, and not just suppressing it, but when we suppress, it's made into sediment. So if you give yourself permission to think deeply and examine it, you'll benefit and you will not be judged. So challenge yourself not to judge yourself in this space when you take a moment to reflect on this. And I'll give you just about 2 or 3 minutes. And then if you would like to share at your table, you may. Okay, so I'll go first. One of my earliest memories of money was when I was, it was our first foster sister that had come into our home. Her name was Alex, and she had been raised on welfare essentially her entire life. And so a comfort meal for her really meant McDonald's. And so we had an uptick in going to McDonald's in our house, which was not the best thing, obviously. And you know, it was the 90s, okay? People got away with it then. But we'd go to McDonald's, and I realized the reason why, right? My mom had been so against it prior to that, and I realized the reason why she kind of loosened up and my dad was doing this is because it was comfort for Alex. And so I realized, you know, even though we weren't a family with a ton of economic resources, they used what they had to provide comfort to people. And yeah, that's kind of my first crystallized memory of how money is used in powerful ways. So yeah, it doesn't have to be that deep. Modeled behavior is a powerful thing, and to demonstrate that for you, I'd like you to all, everybody make a circle with your fingers like this. And go ahead and put it on your cheek. I said to put it on your cheek, but everybody just followed exactly what I did. Because that is how modeled behavior operates in our life. And there is so much in our money behavior that is deep ingrained in the way we spend, the way we feel, the way we pursue, the way we strive, that has been modeled for us. So I want you to know that it is not your fault. It is your parents' fault. Just kidding. But truly, if we observe our actions through that lens as we go about the course of a day, it really is so enlightening how things we do, good, bad, neutral, is just emulating, because we are mammals that were hardwired to emulate behavior that we see. But what this 4 weeks could do for you, if you allow it, is allow disruption to that process, to any damaging behaviors that we have adopted and adapted into our lives just based on modeling. So my career background is about 20 years in banking. So I worked in wealth management, selling wealth management to the 1% of wealth in the United States, writing communications and marketing in the wealth management arena. And then after that made my soul feel like a rotten prune, I shifted gears into the credit union space and helped people who were underserved become homeowners in the Bay Area. And that was a ton of fun. But through the experience of 2 decades in working in various facets of banking, one thing was constant. It was a sense of longing, always a sense of not enough, a sense of scarcity. And that existed amongst, yes, the people that I served that were traditionally underserved, but it also existed amongst the people that were the 1% of wealth in the United States. And it is the same. It is the same sentiment. It is that same visceral feeling of angst and not enoughness. Just this low-grade feeling of scarcity that is the same in every human being. Not every single human being, but the vast majority of human beings on both ends of the spectrum. And that juxtaposition in my mind, I just could not make sense of. So I started to get really curious and ask a lot of questions about that. Because I thought this can't be true for every human, that every human truly doesn't have enough. So what is it? What is it about our minds and our bodies and our makeup that tell us that we don't have enough? Perhaps in some cases that we aren't enough. What is driving that striving and that longing inside of us? And do we have the ability to quiet that in our lives? Because if we have the ability to silence that scarcity voice in our lives, how might our lives be different? How would my life be different? So my life and my story was one of totally operating from a scarcity mentality. And I thought that it was righteous striving. We are from the Bay Area, as I mentioned, right at the corner of San Francisco and Silicon Valley. So it was like being born on a treadmill in some ways. I'm a third-generation American in the United States, third-generation homeowner in the United States, and that was reverenced growing up. So being a person that strived for more and worked hard and had to prove in every room that we went in that we were worthy of being there, there was a deep sense of angst that was hard-coded and deep within. And it went unexamined in my life until just about 2 years ago. So I'll tell you a story about how I got to a place where I created some space, or space was created for me, about how I could examine that. And it was about 2.5-ish years ago. The day was 114 degrees, literally, that we had moved to Arizona. We had lived in the Bay Area prior to that all of our lives, and we worked way too much. We would have told you that our life was our daughters and our priority was the Lord and good things. Working hard to make sure that they had enough and more of everything, that their educational opportunities would be fulfilled, that we could live a balanced life someday. If we worked hard now, if we met goals and deadlines now, then at some point we could take a breath and be happy. And the treadmill just caused so much angst. So at one point we came to our boiling point and we realized we cannot maintain this life anymore. So we decided on a move to Arizona. And at the time, you probably have friends that have moved to Arizona. There's kind of a mass exodus right now from California to cheaper costs of living areas so that people can be in pursuit of this more balanced life, right? So it was 114 degrees the day we moved there, and but I tell you what, I could not have been happier. We pulled up to this beautiful home that was, you know, the stuff that Bay Area dreams are made of. No humans in the Bay Area could ever afford this. I mean, we were living like Colombian drug lords, okay, in Arizona for regular Bay Area money. And you know, I took the kiddos out to the pool. We didn't even unpack. We basically just got out of the U-Haul. I packed up the girls and said, let's go to the pool. And it was gorgeous, you guys. And not pools, okay? It was like one of these resort communities with a sand entry bottom pool and then another Olympic-sized pool and just, you know, palm trees and fake as the day is long, but it felt like being at the beach, okay? My soul was a little burnt to a crisp at the time and it just felt good to be there. So my kiddos are playing and my 15-year-old niece is with us and she has my little one and they're bonding and it was just going to be better. It was going to be better than it had been. Our marriage was going to get better. We were going to have more time together now. My mom's arthritis was going to get better being in the desert. It was the hope. And we just knew that life was going to get better. It was going to slow down. Finally, this was going to be the moment we could take a breath. And I remember floating in the pool. And it was glorious. I don't think my body had been that relaxed in months, but maybe ever. That had been one of the first days that I did not have what was almost a full-time job from the time I had been 15 years old. And I was just relaxed, floating in the pool. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes passed, 3 minutes passed, and it was surreal because I could see our future and I could feel that things were going to get better. 5 minutes passed, 6 minutes passed, probably 7 or 8. And I just laid there, completely relaxed. I could hear the kiddos with my ears immersed under the water in total relaxation. Probably about 12 minutes had passed, and something inside said, get up and do a head count. And I got up to find my daughters, and I counted 1, and I counted 2, and not the third. Counted 1, counted 2, and still couldn't see the third. So I screamed out to my niece from across the length of the pool, where's Franny? And she looked at me and went, she didn't know. And it felt like many minutes had passed at that time, but probably realistically another 2 minutes passed before I saw her out of the corner of my eye, floating face down with a halo of her dark curls around her head. And I knew what that had meant, that it had been at least 12 minutes. So I went to her as fast as I could get to her, but my mind knew what that math meant. And I picked her body up, and it was heavier than it should have been. And I saw her face was very swollen, and she had what I now know is called petechia, which is red broken blood vessels covering her entire face. Her lips were purple. And I thought for sure my baby was gone. And I just, knee-jerk reaction, started to scream out to Jesus. It was the only thing my body or mind could do at that point. And I took her body, draped her over my arms, and took her onto the sand. And the minutes are passing in my mind. My daughters and my niece are standing over me, completely freaked out, old enough to understand what this was meaning. And by the mercy of God Almighty, by the grace of God Almighty, 1 cough, and then 2 coughs. And then I picked her body up, and she sat up. And she looked at me, but completely catatonic. She opened her eyes, but completely catatonic. And what was running through my mind at that point was just severe brain damage, severe brain damage, severe brain damage. And I knew that if that was the case, that would hang around my neck for eternity as her mom. But I was just so overwhelmingly grateful that my baby had opened her eyes, period. And as the minutes passed, she started to vomit a little bit, blink her eyes, and she came to. And she just said, "Mommy." And it was an inexplicable miracle in that moment. So now why would I share with you what could be my life's greatest shame? Number one, because when we bring our shame to the surface and we say it out loud, it has less power over us. And then number two, when we talk about our shame, we give someone else the ability to also get free from their shame. And so the reason I share this with you today is because this awakening happened to me after that moment. Now, there are two ways to experience this awakening, and I'll tell you the way I experienced the awakening, and I don't recommend it, right? This near-death experience. So what I learned about this phenomenon that happened to me afterward is that it's really common with survivors of near-death experiences or people who almost lose someone very close to them. This gratitude welled up inside my body and my mind and my heart, so pervasive and so visceral that it started to affect every single thing about the rest of my life. So the things that me and my husband had disagreed about before, they were vaporized, totally vaporized. We were swimming in gratitude. The fights that my kids would constantly have, it was fine because we were constantly just overflowing with love for them. We started to tell our daughters 10,000 times a day why they were special and how much we appreciated them. Every expression of our heart and of our mind that came out of our mouth started to be an expression of appreciation for one another and realizing everything that we had. It was like the lights had been off and then they were switched on immediately. The longings of my heart started to change. I drive an old minivan that constantly has Cheeto dust in it and broken crayons melted on the seats. And my heart up to that point had been longing for the new Infiniti. I think it's the Infiniti J, is that what it's called? With the Q, with the third row. You guys know this Infiniti, I bet, right? And my heart had been longing for it up to that point, but the longing of my heart changed cold turkey, where I looked at that mommy van with such severe appreciation after that point. And it's like my eyes were open to the fact that, oh, this thing is almost paid off. And not only that, but the kiddos in it are fighting, which means everyone's alive, which means everyone's okay. So from one moment to the next, everything changed in our life, our marriage. This had a reverberating effect on our marriage because I started to thank Keith when he changed out the trash bag for the 10,000th time a day instead of taking for granted that it was going to happen. So I would say, honey, thank you for doing that, but sincerely mean it from the bottom of my heart. And then he would feel appreciated, so he would appreciate back for the things that I appreciated. And it created this funnel of gratitude that just created this culture in our home that was a new culture. And the longings of our heart changed from the drone beat of please, please, please to thank you, thank you, thank you. And everything about our life flipped upside down at that point. Now, our actual financial situation, it was the same. It was the same. Our retirement was still not fully on track. We still had the debt that we had, but the way that we started to look at life was so viscerally different that the quality of our life shot through the roof. So that is an opportunity for you today as well. This is going to be the one bit of homework you have in this class throughout the 4 weeks. So there will be experts that share practical things with you throughout the course of the 4 weeks where you can opt to do that homework or not. This one is absolutely required should you choose to accept your mission. And what this is, everybody's getting a gratitude journal that's just like this here. So there are 2 ways to get to this hyper-aware, heightened state of aliveness and gratitude. One of them, near death. The second one is to implement a practice like this in your life. So my challenge to you is to start it for 7 days and see what the experience is like. It's just 6 things you list a day. I am grateful for. And this is a key piece of it. You have to share this gratitude with one other human being in your life. You can do it via text. You can do it via phone call if you want. You can share it on Facebook if you'd like to do that. That extra credit for that because then everybody sees your gratitudes. You can share it with the person that's listed that's been special to you in your life. But I challenge you to do this because it changes thinking in such deep ways. And so we did this with our class back in November. And there was someone who was a participant of our class. Her name is Andy Long, and she is a founder of a nonprofit that ministers to girls' identity called Bloom. And so her website's Hello Bloom, but I'm going to invite her up to share a little bit about her experience with the gratitude practice and how it started to change things from her. Give her a hand.
So I think I was 5 years old when I first heard the message that I don't belong. And I was with 2 other girls my age, and they wrote a sign, and it was on a piece of paper, and they said, Andy can't come in. And they put it on the door and shut the door. And so I was on the outside, and they were inside. And I think at 5 years old, that just really told me the lie that I don't belong, and that I have to earn my way in, and that I have to be somebody to be accepted and part of it. And it was really just from 5 years old, a lie that I bought into, and it shaped my identity of the cycle of hustling for love and belonging and constantly striving and feeling like I need to be enough and I'm not. And then in college it happened again. It was my first few weeks of starting college. It started with just rumors that spread around of me and other guys, and it just the rumors were pretty bad. I remember my girlfriend calling me and saying, "Did you hear about these rumors that are going around about you?" And for me, it was a really hard time to process that and wonder, like, why are these rumors even happening? And then it moved online, and I got so many comments just about my physical appearance, my weight. I was called derogatory names, and that just fueled the lie that I believed a long time ago of not being enough. And I started believing that that's who I was. And it was such a painful journey of believing those lies and having those become who I thought I was. Fast forward, I went to church and I heard Kenton's message on saying 6 things that you're grateful for every single day. And I thought that was interesting. But I just said it to myself, and then, some days I would forget and I forgot about it. But then I took the Soul and Money class. We were challenged to do 6 things again, but this time share it with someone else. And I was lucky because the girl who was sitting right next to me, she wanted to exchange numbers right then and there, and so we started it the following day and texted each other 6 things. And it was so awesome to get her 6 things and then think about mine and send them off. And I think that sharing piece really changed something for me. And I started noticing within myself too. I would notice and I would be aware and awake to all the good things in my life. And not only that, not only content with what I had, but who I was too. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see all those things wrong with me that I constantly did for so many years, and things that other people said about me too. I could look in the mirror and say thank you for who I am and how God made me. 7 days became a month, and we just continued on because we found it so powerful. And by that time, I had been telling all my other friends about it, just because I've seen the difference that it made in my life, and again with the relationship that I had with myself, and the inner talk too that we had. And so I began sharing it. And in 1 week, I remember I shared it with a friend and challenged my friends in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York. And I just checked in with them after a week, and they all said it made their lives so much better. And they were checking in with their spouses and friends, and it just became such a relational thing to do too. And not only that, I would ask people like in stores who were helping me check out, they would always ask me, "How's your day?" or how's your weekend? And I would respond saying, "Well, what are you grateful for? Like, can you tell me 3 things or 6 things if you can?" And it would catch them off guard, but they would absolutely light up. I remember someone who was helping me with my oil change responded that they are grateful for their life and that they aren't in jail. And they said that their mom tells them every day, like, that they shouldn't be alive. And so just to be able to have that conversation and, celebrate with him that he's alive was so special. And he totally said this made my day. And so usually after I ask that question, I get a thank you back. And I love that. I love being thanked for just asking the simple question of what are you grateful for? Now, gratitude has become such a part of who I am that there's less space for the questioning and the, lies of what I've heard before. It doesn't matter because I am a grateful person and I love sharing gratitude with other people, and that is who I am, and that's the light that can shine from within, and I think that that's enough, and that makes me enough.
You may have heard this phrasing before. What is the one thing no one has in Orange County? The answer is enough. And it's not unique to Orange County. Friends, that is the world over. That is the world over. Like I mentioned, I lived in a third world country early in our marriage, that we went for ministry purposes, and we walked with people who literally struggled for their next serving of food. And the angst is, in some cases, less than the people on the other end of the spectrum that we served in the wealth management. So it is a human thing. So if you have felt your identity and you have felt this sense of striving in you that just cannot be quieted, that feels like I will be able to rest at some point in the future, it's your decision to end that now. You're given the opportunity to quiet that voice and decide that I am going to do it at this juncture in my life today. And this is the opportunity to do it with the gratitude journal. So reading through Philippians 4:11-13 on your handouts, the New International Version says, "For I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in poverty or in want. I can do this all through him who gives me the strength." And the Message version, "Actually, I don't have a sense of needing anything personally. I've learned by now to be quite content whatever my circumstances. I'm just as happy with little as much as with little. I've found the recipe for being happy, whether full or hungry, hands full or hands empty. Whatever I have, wherever I am, I can make it through anything in the one who makes me who I am." And so what this tells me, I've emboldened the parts where it talks about learning, that it is a learned behavior. That the very few people on this earth and in our culture who have embraced total satisfaction with their lives and a deep sense of happiness, it didn't just happen. It's absolute learned behavior that comes as a result of discipline and practice. Contentment's a learned behavior. The human default setting is actually scarcity, perhaps for survival's sake. It's our challenge to learn the mental discipline and to find the recipe, to build the gratitude muscle, to achieve contentment. And so there's a couple of great resources that are on the back of your sheet there. I cited everywhere that our learning's coming from today, and one of them is this fabulous documentary called Happy. It's from an Academy Award-winning director. So we're going to watch a bit of it now on, just our society's perspective on happiness and striving. The difference between a person who earns $5,000 and $50,000 is dramatic in the measured happiness levels, but the difference between the person who earns $50,000 and $50 million, it's not dramatic. Happiness levels pretty much peter out. So isn't it tempting to think that if we had $50 million, our problems would sort of be able to get resolved? It's a tempting sentiment. It's a notion. But I can personally guarantee you, from having insight into the life of people who have more than they could ever spend, it's never enough. It never seems to be the case. And this hedonic treadmill is the reason why. Hedonic referring to hedonism. Whatever level of wealth you are at, you adapt to it, and you'll always want more. Living a life focused on the next goal leads to constant dissatisfaction. And that is the way of the world we live in. It's especially the way of the country we live in, and even more precisely, the way of the county we live in. So it's up to us to disrupt this. And actually, what happens as a result of living in this awakened state of gratitude is that it does, in fact, have a reverberating effect on the practical details of our life. It has an effect eventually. You'll see if you come on this journey to recording these gratitudes daily and sharing them with a person, that it allows us to start thinking differently about even spending decisions, saving decisions, thinking more differently, intentionally, and getting quiet around the decisions that we make around money before we make those decisions. So over the next 4 weeks, I'll map out what it's kind of going to look like for us. So next week, we'll come hopefully with, let's shoot for 5 out of 7 days. It's a challenge to incorporate a new habit in our life. But will you raise your hand if you're going to give it a shot? Okay, give it a shot. If you can't do 7, 5 is better than 0. So go for that. And if you can't do 5, 4, 4 would be okay too. But just give yourself the grace. If something has to be carved out of your life, then make the sacrifice to do it so that you have the 5 minutes to do that. So specificity. What makes gratitude meaningful is not the intensity of it, but the specificity of it. So every day when you record your gratitudes, this is the challenge, that you can't record the same thing twice. You can record it on different days if you would like, right? Like I'm specifically grateful for my mom's health, right? So if you did that on day 1 and it comes back in your heart on day 7 and it really rises to the top for you, that's okay to do. But day after day, really make it a challenge to yourself to get more specific with the gratitudes, right? So specifically, rather than, maybe on day 1, it's I'm grateful for my mom's health. Maybe on day 2, I'm grateful for, and I'm feeling that again, I'm grateful for her arthritis medication that gives her relief from pain most of the time, right? And what happens is, this is an actual thing that happens, the neural pathways of our brain start to reform to be conducive to recalling what is positive about our lives. So there is some research that's referenced in the back there that you can Google around and look it up. But this idea of neuroplasticity is that our brains are actually made of a material that very closely resembles plastic. And when we adapt new behaviors over a period of time, 30 is better than 7, 2 months is better than 1 month, then we actually reroute the neural pathways of our brains to be able to think in literal different patterns. So when the Bible talks about the renewing of the mind, God has actually given us the capability to change the physical makeup of our brains and the patterns of our thinking. But that's what happens. And when we get more specific and more disciplined, and even when it is hard to recall that 5th and 6th gratitude, because it's going to get hard, you're going to be sitting there for a minute really having to dig deep on day 3 and on day 4. But when you allow your brain to do that, you're actually exercising the muscle that reroutes the neural pathways of your brain, allowing your perspective to shift. So give yourself that gift of doing it. Our modern context and culture and economics aren't supportive for us attempting to achieve belonging and significance the way of our forefathers, right? So the way of our forefathers was to have 20 plus children, and our modern context doesn't support that, right? But what we are really after, ultimately, at our core, is belonging and significance. That's the work of Adler, and you can see that referenced if you want to Google around about that too. We begin to see, when we record these gratitudes and reflect deeply on these things in our lives, what we are really after with our financial behaviors. And so each week as we go through, we're going to talk about some practical stuff. We're going to have some experts here that talk specifically about things like budgeting and debt management. They're going to share their stories as well over the course of these next 4 weeks with some practical homework for you to adapt if it's applicable to your situation. So week 2, we're going to talk about a gratitude mindset and living within our means. Week 3, a scarcity mindset, because in order to fully understand sufficiency, which is what we'll talk about week 4, we have to totally understand scarcity. And after the soul and money and the accompanying homework is done, everybody who goes through the 4 weeks of the class is eligible to be matched up with a one-on-one financial coach who will spend up to 3 one-hour sessions with you. They're people that attend our church and that largely work in finance and volunteer their time as professionals to walk with people in financial kinship and just help you with whatever you need. Literally this week we helped a gentleman just look at his credit report. He hadn't looked at it in quite a while, went through a messy divorce, looked through his credit report and find the errors and find the duplicates and find the old dated items on his credit report, put in the request to get those removed to have his FICO score get where it needs to be so that he can purchase a home. We do that type of thing, just general debt organization, creating what's called a debt snowball so that you can have an end date to being out of debt completely. Just general budgeting too is available to you. So really wherever you're at, it's completely confidential. We'll match you with a one-on-one coach after the 4 weeks of the class. All you have to do is reach out and say, I'm ready to do it, and we'll get started on that. So going back to our outline, so I'm going to give you guys a minute to just get started with the process of gratitudes. So we'll take just about 3 minutes here and just go through the process of trying to record 6 gratitudes, and then if you would, share it with the neighbor next to you. Okay, yeah. At the macro level maybe, and then we see the micro level. That's an interesting point you bring up, because the way we'll all begin, and it will be at the end of the spectrum, that's the macro level. I'm grateful for my parents, I'm grateful for the home I live in. Day 4 and day 5 and day 6, you'll start to see, oh, I'm gonna have to get more specific about that, right? So I'm grateful for when I'm tempted in my home, for example, to complain about my old cabinets, what my brain does now is says something like, but look at these ceilings you have. And I conditioned my brain to be able to flip that way. Now, it's not always a perfectly maintained practice in my life. And days that go by where I don't maintain the practice, I feel it. But like Andy said, it will keep you out of the dark place. It will start to have a reverberating effect on your thinking about everything. Where as I'm walking through my home, just instead of having the low-grade discontentment that I once had with everything, seeing every mess that my kids made, seeing everything that needs to be repaired, seeing every pile of laundry that I'm behind at, right? Rather than seeing these things, my brain has literally been trained to see the wonder and the beauty in the things that I have. I have piles of kids' clothes because I have kids, right? The beauty in the things that we've been given. So what do we know about behavior change, and especially when it comes to economic behavior change around money? We know that we fail if we fixate on the symptoms and not address what undergirds our decision making and our behavior. So I know this might sound like a real leap to keep a gratitude journal, and it's actually going to affect your bank statements and balances and your credit and your abilities. But go with me on this journey, and I promise that you'll begin to see the attachment emerge between these two things, that you can draw a direct line from the condition of our heart to the way we feel. And the way we feel has a reverberating impact on the way we make decisions around what we spend or don't spend, or invest in or don't invest in, or just the unconscious decisions that we make around spending on a daily basis. So if you would like practical homework in addition to this, there's an app called Every Dollar that's by the Dave Ramsey Company, Every Dollar. You can download it, it's completely free. And what this does is gives you the ability to track your spending. If that is an issue for you, tracking spending, again, heightened awareness around what you're doing. So that's a good tool. And we start a lot with our coaching clients in just starting to track spending to start to capture the behaviors. And I'm not saying do anything about it yet. If you're spending daily at Starbucks and that's a behavior that you maybe want to examine at some point, examine it at some point. We're not going to go too fast on this journey. But if you want just for now to start to collect data on your spending behaviors, that's a good idea too. Optional. But this, your mission, if you choose to accept it, we're going to get to what's below the tip of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is how our spending manifests and how we feel about what is enough and what is not enough. But below the surface of the ocean is everything inside of us that drives the financial behaviors. Ultimately, the way we feel about ourselves and the way we see ourselves. And this is a tool that helps us to get some clarity on that. As we wrap up here, I want to leave you with is that I'm just going to present an idea for your examination. And whether or not you believe it today, it's okay. But just chew on this over the course of this next week or so, if you would. That you are exactly what God had in mind when He created you. That there is no need to strive. There is no need to hustle as hard as you have hustled in your life if you are whole in your Creator just as you are today. And maybe for some of us, some part of us wants to believe that, and some part of us just can't, because what we saw modeled, maybe because of our upbringing in some cases, part of us just can't embrace that, and that's okay. But through the course of this journey, I want you to just think about that. I want you to just chew on that and examine that could possibly be true, that you're exactly enough, that there's not a thing that you have to do to earn this love, this amazing love. And as we enter this Easter season, just hold that in your hand for examination. If it's not something that lives in your heart yet, that's an okay thing. Because what the Easter season, let's not get lost in the busyness of it or the fabulous and beautiful displays and productions, right, that even our church puts on, and 15,000 people out on this lawn in this celebratory mood, and these beautiful things that, egg hunts and everything else that we do to celebrate family and commemorate this beautiful thing. Friends, take a moment to pause in it and consider what resurrection is like. Resurrection will never mean the same to me as it does. It will never be more real to me in my life than it is now, after I held my baby in my arms and thought she was gone, and then she wasn't. So whether or not she was gone, actually, in my human mind, being able to perceive an actual death to life situation that felt very much like death for me, and then life, and the way that affected the low grade yearning that was in my heart, and the way they got flipped to gratitude in my life, it will never be the same. So take time, please, this Easter season, as you reflect on God's love for you, sending his son to die for you, whether or not that is something that you really and truly embrace and believe. Just consider that possibly it is true that that happened, that sacrifice was made for you, just because you are that loved. That there's nothing about your identity that's wrong. There's nothing to prove. Nothing. And I think that's the space he wants us in, and that's where he can start to minister to behaviors of our life. So, asking the right questions. We're made to strive. So we can't apologize for striving. We're made to want more. We're made to be satisfied with something good in our life for a short time, only to then be excited about that next thing, right? We have some athletes in the room that do amazing things, right? In career, it is fun to strive and to break down barriers and to reach goals that we've never accomplished before. We're made for that. So turning that identity then over to God and saying, how is it that you want me, how do you want me to unleash this striving in my life? Because so far, what has it gotten me? And in my life, it was true to say that striving just led to more striving, that there was never satisfaction that lasted more than 24 hours after any promotion or any moving up on an org chart. There was a brief satisfaction that felt like, good job, what's next? And isn't our society kind of wired for that, right? When a person meets someone nice, we say, when are you going to get engaged, right? That's the constant question, right? And when they get engaged, when are you going to get married? Have you set a date, right? And when they get married, when are you going to have kids, right? When are you going to have another one? Right? This is like our unexamined behavior. This is the way we treat each other, just constantly on the treadmill with each other, where we're asking what's next, what's next, what's next, what's next, because it's hard-coded into our culture, largely unexamined. So this is the space in which we examine it. Maybe this is where the point in our lives where we put the brakes on for a minute and say, I don't know if I want to live like that. I just want to ask myself the question. I want to give myself the luxury of asking the question of whether I want to be on this treadmill or I don't. Does that feel true for anyone? Cool. Let us examine the 3 lies that are the enemies of contentment on the bottom of page 1. Number 1, God is not telling you the truth. That's what the enemy will come to you and whisper in your ears. We have an enemy on this earth that does not want us to be content. If he can keep us far from God using scarcity to do it, he will do it. It's a masterful plan if you think about it. Turning what is hard-coded into us, this striving and longing and desire for achievement, and flipping it towards his advantage where we're constantly in lack and want and in dissatisfaction. That is his MO. And we see it first like in the Garden of Eden, right? This is, to me, his big career move, where he was in the Garden of Eden and he made himself visible to Eve and he explained to her everything she didn't have. Eve had everything there was to have. The temperature was so perfect that they didn't need to wear clothing, right? They were perfect physical specimens with every good thing, with food available to them, every food available to them, everything they could possibly need or want in the Garden of Eden, this perfect place. And what Satan did is came and said, yeah, but what don't you have? And isn't that the way? Isn't that the whisper we hear? Sure, you've got a lot, but what is it that you don't have? What is it maybe that is out there that you do not have access to? And it works so well with Eve. I feel like that was his cornerstone career move that he built his whole career on, where he realized how well it worked, and it's just the same dirty tricks again and again through the generations that he used on her and he uses on you and is sometimes successful with. So if we learn to recognize that voice that says, God's not telling you the truth, you don't have everything you need, just recognize it at this point. I'm not even asking you to do anything with that information yet, but just hear it. Hear that angst, hear that anxiety when it makes itself present in your ear. Number 2, that he is withholding something from you, that God is withholding something from you. We talked about modeled behavior earlier and how we follow it so subconsciously, so beyond our examination, so beyond even our will. And in some cases, we have had people in our lives who have raised us who have been intentionally withholding. And God is not that Father. And that's what he wants you to know about his character, that there is sufficiency in him and for you, and that it is not his nature to withhold any good thing from you. Now, redefining good, that's hard work, and you're going to start to go on that journey for yourself as you count your gratitudes, and we'll talk more about that in the coming weeks. Number 3, big lie of Satan, the one thing you don't have is the one thing you need, and you can't rely on God for it, so go get it, because you're capable. And just recognize when that lie comes to the surface in your life. Because the truth of his sufficiency, and we're going to cover this in coming weeks, is that everything is present that we need in this life. And I know that sounds like a lot right now, but we're going to unpack that in week 3. But what Satan's big lie is that, but there's this one thing. There's this one thing. Orange County is the divorce capital of the United States of America. And I think a major reason for that is the pervasive discontentment that we feel, right? It reverberates into our culture in every which way, and especially in marriages when there is even kinship and happiness. Satan comes in to say, but there's one thing that you don't have, and creates cracks in even the most precious of relationships in our lives. So, the challenge this week, as we start to examine the things for which we're grateful, it's also to start to listen for when that voice of lack is whispered in our ear, and just consider how that is at odds with the voice of gratitude. How more runs contrary to thank you. And as your heart starts to wake up, because that's what happens. There's an alertness. There's a sharpness that comes along with it. There's like a eye-opening experience. Watch, day 3, day 4, you'll start to see. There's an eye-opening experience where you start to realize, to feel the grass under your feet and the sun beating on your face. And even if this sounds corny, believe me, you guys, I'm not a Pollyanna nature person. But this part of me started to wake up where I started to appreciate the earth and all of its beauty. And this is a gift you can give yourself too, where you just drink in the goodness that it is to be alive on this earth and everything else. This gratitude has an ordering effect on everything else, including money, but not limited to money, and the way we behave with it, and an ordering effect on every single relationship in our life. You willing to go on this journey with me? 4 weeks? Cool. That was a lot. Okay, let's close in prayer, and and then we're off and running. So Father, we thank you. We thank you so much that you're present in this room. We thank you for a space to examine the discontent parts of our heart and our life, and to consider whether there may be another way to live. Would you be with my friends as they attempt to install a new practice in their life? It is never easy, and we live in a busy culture. You know this about us. But would you give us the ability to approach this Would you create little pockets of time that we can do this? Would you give us little reminders so that we can do this and we can share it with a person and we can see the way that our hearts start to wake up and how alignment with you and everything you've given us has an ordering effect on everything in our lives. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for the human beings in this room, and I'm grateful for the journey of transformation that you want to take us on.